Hello and welcome to Voices of BlueScope, the podcast where we go behind the scenes at BlueScope to meet the people who create strength every day. I'm your host Martin Feld, and thank you for tuning in. Today we're joined by a very special guest who played quite an important role in the history of the Port Kembla Steelworks. That person is Mr. George Edgar, and he was the first ever Wollongong-born-and-raised GM, or General Manager, here at the facility. He's very kindly come into the facility today, here at the former General Manager's residence, Lindenfels, to share his story with us, his personal experiences, his career, and maybe some insights about the way that steelmaking has changed over time. Thank you so much for joining us today, George.
It's a pleasure, mate.
Let's go back to the beginning.
Yep.
Tell us about how you first joined the Port Kembla Steelworks. What brought you to this place?
Well, really what brought me to this place was a friend of my father's, actually. Really, I was hell-bent on becoming a carpenter. And this guy who actually worked at the steelworks, he worked for Cleary Brothers down on the number 1 blast furnace site. And he said to me one day, you should do metallurgy, and they're good jobs. So that changed my mind a fair bit, actually. I always liked science subjects and maths. So I swung to metallurgy and applied for a job here. And I got accepted as a metallurgy trainee on the 15th of December 1959. Started working in the test house here under a bloke called Dick Scott. And Dick was a formidable man. He was, I don't know what it is in kilograms, but he was 20 stone. That day also changed my life forever in some ways. One of which was my name changed, which was kind of interesting. When you applied for the job, you had to write out, of course, your full name, which was George Anthony Edgar. My dad's name was George, so I got brought up as a Tony. So my wife still calls me Tony. All my family does. And a lot of people in Wollongong still refer to me as Tony, and a lot refer to me as George. Well, how it happened was there were 8 trainees started that same day, and the only local one was me, in the test house that is, and Dick was reading out the names. And he got to me and he said, who's George Edgar? I said, well, that's me, but I don't get called George, I get called Tony. And he said, son, the bloody bit of paper says your name's George, and that's what it is. Everyone else thought it was a huge joke, and everybody called me George, and that stuck. So from throughout my working life, everyone I've met at work has called me George. So that's a good thing and a bad thing, actually, but I won't go into that. But there's times when I wish it had never happened, but still, that's how it started. So I started working in the test house. I moved across to flat products into research, tinplate research, with a fine old gentleman named Dr. Stiebel. We did shelf life tests on tinplate cans, which was an interesting job. We used to buy prunes by the tonne. The most corrosive thing you can put in a tin can is prune juice. We made our own bloody prune juice, lots of it. And to this day I can't stand the sight of a prune. But that was part of my job there. And I moved from there I did the liaison metallurgy job between what was then AINS and Lysarts. And I did that for about a year. And I used to write a weekly report that somehow or other management found pretty useful. And I got rung up one day by the boss of the flat products area, Seth Francis, told me to report to the strip mill at 7:20 on Monday morning. I was going to start working production. And that's where it started, all from there, I guess. And would I have been maybe 21 at that stage. So I spent a lot of time in the hospital. And then they decided they were going to build an 84-inch shear line, over in what was called K building, it probably still is. And and I got the job of commissioning that, which was an interesting job. And then it moved from there, I suppose, across to the tin mill, and I think it was probably around about 1969 I got appointed to the monthly staff. Do you want to hear about how that happens? That's an interesting process, and it's a lot different, I'm sure, today. But back then, there were the wages people, there were fortnightly staff, and there were monthly staff. And you got appointed to the monthly staff. You were told, unofficially, that this is what was going to happen on this particular day. You were told to bring a coat to work and make sure you wore a tie. You went up to the general manager's office with all the other managers, and you were formally told, and everybody congratulated you. And then you wandered over to the annex to the dining room in the engineering building, to the monthly staff dining room. And in the annex, I think, you probably got a beer, which always worried me a bit, because there was a dismissal offence, instant dismissal if you were found drinking on the job. But anyhow, then they'd open the door and you'd wander into the main monthly staff dining room. And there they would leave you. They would go and sit at their table, and you could go and find a seat wherever you damn well liked. Yeah. So it was very, very different. There was the monthly staff dining room, there was a fortnightly staff dining room there as well, totally separated and walled off. You got a free meal, and you got scones on the table. Always remember the scones. And it was a bit cliquey, if you like. There were absolutely no females in the monthly staff dining room back then. So things were very, very different to what they are today. And thankfully today's a lot different to what it was back then. So from then on, you no longer got paid fortnightly, you got paid monthly. And you got 4 weeks annual leave instead of 3, and you're expected to work unlimited amounts of overtime, which more often than not happened to be the case. So, and I just worked my way up from there, I suppose. It was I was an assistant superintendent of what was called coal strip, which was the front end of the tin mill. The slab mill was having a lot of problems. I don't know how much detail I should go. I could go forever, but they turned it into a universal mill. They had, rather than have just horizontal rolls, they had these attached, massive, big vertical rolls, which sped up the production process. I think these rolls each had about a 6,000 horsepower motor on them. And periodically they'd rip them off the main stand. Things would get out of sync. So I got sent up there to fix it. And then I got sent back to the tin millers. No longer had 2 superintendents, they decided to have 1, and that job fell to me. So, and then from there it was manage the flat products operations, so that was all the flat products area. And then when Jerry Ellis came here as the GM, there was a big restructure, and I became one of 3, I think, assistant general managers. And I was secondary production, so that sort of expanded a bit. It took in the steel making as well as all the mills.
In everything you've said so far, I really love the description that you've given of a few key points. First of all, the difference in the culture.
Yep.
Not just between, I suppose, different people in the hierarchy of the steelworks then, but also the way that diversity of people has really changed. That's really interesting. Not to mention your little point about prune juice is somewhat hilarious. Yes. To me, when you say that, it kind of sounds like some form of early exposure testing for products or something,
right.
Weathering away these products. But in the course of these years that you've described, I'm very interested to hear what you have to say about the steelworks as a site. Driving through today, or just visiting or going on a tour, I'm sure it's very different in some ways and not so different in others. Can you paint a bit of a picture for us about what the site was like at the time that you were describing and how maybe it's shifted to today?
Well, there's been massive changes over that time. I think probably people often say there were 23,000 people employed on this site. I don't think it ever was 23. It was 23 if you included the collieries. But so you could argue there was maybe 20,000 people worked here, and they did everything. You could make any tool you wanted to have made. They had all their own painters, all their own carpenters. Nothing was done off site. It was all done on site, and there were a lot of people. Number One Works Mills, which was the old merchant mills, when that closed, in fact I closed that, that was a huge change too in terms of the geography of the site in a way. I mean, it went from a highly productive area to more like warehousing and that sort of stuff. We had a slab mill. I closed the slab mill, and it closed because continuous casting started up, and there was a big internal argument about that. The guy who was then assistant general manager was a bloke named George Stewart. George was an interesting guy in more ways than one, but he argued like hell that the slab mill was the most economical way to make slabs, whereas the primary production guys were arguing like heck about continuous casting, and thankfully they won because far away a much better product. And so that had a big impact on labour force on that side of the plant as well, like the flat product side. And in amongst all this, there was big cultural change as well. So I forget the year, I should forget, I think it was about 83, when we had the major downsizing. I think it was the Button steel plant, and the government were going to make investment easy for us, but we had to do a lot for ourselves and we had to downsize. So there was a lot of work that stopped being done, and there were a lot of people who lost their jobs. Most of them voluntarily. They took a package, and the initial package was a very generous one, and there were heaps of people that left, staff and wages. And I have lost count of the number of people at that time that I spoke to saying, I don't think you should go, because I thought it was the wrong thing for them, for their future. But for a lot of those guys, and they were all guys, there were no women on the plant then, on the production side, it was the biggest amount of money they'd seen in their life, and it became too tempting and they left. And some of those guys I stayed with, good friends with, really until they died. So, but in all this too, the culture changed a lot. There was a lot of industrial strife. Ever since I started there was industrial strife. And some people hate me saying this, but I think a lot of the problems stem from management. There were some ratbag unionists too, and sometimes they'd go out on the silliest of pretexts, but they just shut the whole place, or most of the place down. And it's the old story, you don't get mad, you get even. And I think a lot of it was a build-up of things, and they decided they'd had enough. When anything came up, they were going to poke management in the eye, and they did. So I'll give you an anecdote. I was still a trainee in the strip mill, and the superintendent was an interesting man to say the least. He'd never get away with doing what he did back then. There was a guy that worked in the end bay. It was called the end bay of the 60-inch shear line, and his job was to paint a stencil on every plate that was cut off a coil. It was a coil plate, and you had to wear a mask. And this day he didn't want to wear a mask. And the way it worked was you could ask somebody to do a job 3 times or give them a direction, and you had to do it 3 times. And if they refused 3 times, you could sack them. This guy got brought over to the strip mill superintendent's office because he was in charge of the cut-up lines. And he called me and he said, come up, you need to get experience in this sort of stuff. Young, I always got to call young'un. So I sat in on this interview. The foreman brought the bloke over. He could speak barely any English at all. And so he said to this guy, "You're going to have to wear a mask." And he shook his head. And then he got asked a second time, and he shook his head. And I'm sitting there thinking, this guy has got a specific reason today why he cannot wear a mask. Whether he's got the flu or I don't know what it was. But on the third occasion, boom, he was gone, sacked. And I just thought then, it's not the way you should be, just awful way to treat people. But they were the people who went on strike. And I think a lot of it was to do with the way we handled people back then. So that's in the late 60s. And thankfully a heck of a lot changed since then. And, in my time in Whyalla, when I went over there to manage that, I was told by John Prescott I had three things to do. Obviously I had a big job to do with the plant because it was losing money. I had to ensure there was no development across a certain road in Whyalla. I wanted to keep a wide berth from residential area to the plant. And I had to look after the wine cellar. 3 jobs. And I think I did all of them reasonably well.
So which one was the hardest?
Oh, the wine cellar was the real job.
Okay.
It just kept going down and down and down. You had to keep refilling the damn thing. Terrible. But there were 4,500 people on that side. And when I left, there was 2,200. And we just stopped doing things. And we never had a strike. Not one. And then I came back here. And the problem area then was plate finishing. They were regularly going out on strike, and again over stupid things. And we changed the whole mentality of that place. And within a year, we'd gone a year with no industrial action whatsoever. So I've been a big believer in it's a way to treat people. And I often used to say at management seminars, you don't get respect because of the stripes on your shoulders, you've got to earn it. And it's not quite true to say the opposite of respect is disrespect, but there's a dead period in between those two things where things can happen, things can fester.
So you obviously learned and witnessed a lot of things in those years about how to be an effective manager, how to treat people, how to ensure that people feel respected or there isn't a feeling of apathy or neglect. As you moved into the role of general manager here in Port Kembla, what was that like for you and how did you feel coming into that role?
Actually, I was excited. That's the first thing, I guess. It was also nice to be coming back home. But having said that, I've got to say too that the 5 years I had in Wales were fantastic years. They were just great people. As they are here, you just had to find the right path, if you like, to engage people. And so I found it's a much, much bigger site and it's much more complex. And it wasn't just, when I came back as, it was a bit of a highfalutin title, Group General Manager and Chief Executive Officer of Integrated Steel Division. So it was Port Kembla Steelworks, it was Lysarts, it was New Zealand Steel, it was our steel operation in the United States and some of the offshore operations. So it was a pretty damn big job. And I also had the collieries, which I wasn't real happy about because I knew very little about coal mining. Actually, I knew nothing about coal mining, and that seemed to be an operation that required some specific knowledge about specific risks. And I didn't have it, and I felt uncomfortable about that. And it was the first to get hived off because I made a lot of noises about that in Melbourne. So coming back was good, exciting, and we had a lot to do to try and change some of the culture. But it's not an homogenous culture. Yeah, there was, if you went to the coke ovens, there was a certain culture that was associated with that. There's a different one in the blast furnaces, another one in the caster area, and so on. So I was trying to find a path through that where we could find some common ground to get some common direction, if you like, as to where we wanted to go. So it was good. Always enjoyed the challenge, and you had some nights where you didn't sleep real well, and there were things that got thrown at you from left field, and there's a lot of pressure put on by government. They wanted to have one person on the site who was the responsible officer for whatever happened. And the only one person that could do that job was the general manager. So I became the responsible officer. And I worried about that a lot. Not because I couldn't blame anybody else if something went wrong or nothing like that. And I said that to one of these government guys, well, if somebody commits suicide on our site, am I responsible for that? And he said, yes, you are. And that blew me away. I thought, and that worried me a lot for quite a while. Like, how the hell am I supposed to know what's in the mind of every employee? You might like to know, but you'll never know. So there's a lot of government overlay started to get put on operations with the EPA, like health and safety, those sorts of things, which I could prattle on all day because I say one thing, it makes me think of something else. But back probably in the early 90s when the management structure changed here altogether, not just here but elsewhere, no longer did you have a steelmaker as a general manager. You had some bloke who was a marketing guy or a businessman, and that went right across all BHP steel operations at least. And the big change was that those guys had no experience at all working on a steel plant. In my early days, we used to have monthly housekeeping inspections. There were safety and housekeeping inspections. If you had a lost time accident, you had to front the general manager's conference every Wednesday, on a Wednesday I should say, and explain how it happened and what the heck you were going to do to prevent a future recurrence. It was really full on about safety. And that all stopped. And it stopped at the top because they didn't realise that this was a big part of running a steelworks or an operation. So,
I mean, if I can interject there, I think you've covered a lot of very important themes in the stories you've told up until this point.
Right.
Safety is a huge one. What's becoming very evident in what you were sharing with me is this realisation, and this is something that's expressed very explicitly in our bond here at BlueScope today, and listeners might be sick of me bringing this up, but it's a very relevant sentence.
Yes.
It's our communities are our homes.
Yes.
Now, what I'm gathering from you as a manager and the people who you were surrounding yourself with, you realised the significance of your place within this community of the Illawarra and other sites around the place. You are touching the lives of people indirectly around the steelworks, even if they're not the people working within your facility. What would you say about how you kind of look at that today now that you're removed from that direct responsibility? Is that something that you think became more evident as a manager or was coming along the way, that feeling of responsibility for community?
no, I think it was, I feel it was always there. Not for everybody though. Like, I'm immediately thinking of one general manager who I won't name, I don't think. Because in every other respect he was a great bloke. He really was. Somebody very special. But when it came to dealing or empathising with the community, just wasn't his cup of tea. He was not comfortable doing it, and he didn't do it.
In terms of place within the community in the Illawarra, I thought it might also be interesting to touch on this particular site where we're doing this recording, Lindenfels, because while you were the first Wollongong-born-and-raised general manager here, as far as I'm aware, you were also the last occupant or resident of this particular residence. So can you speak about that and why you were the last one?
Because I made it that way, I suppose. this was a nice place to live in one way. In another way it wasn't, because if anything significant happened on the plant, you heard it. So, and you'd be out of bed in a flash. But that didn't happen that often, so that wasn't a big issue. It was a really nice place to live, but I had a distinct impression, feeling that this was past its time. The world moved on. This is so anachronistic, it's not funny, and it's sort of a bit, having yourself on. It didn't fit. It was just pretentious, I suppose. You paid rent for this place, you didn't get it for free. And I remember in the first 2 months in the job, they put the bloody rent up, which really annoyed me a bit. But anyhow, it was nothing really too much to complain about it. But I did complain. But it was just didn't fit right with where I was at in my brain about. I saw myself as no different than anyone else on the plant. This sort of an advertisement that you were. So, before, it was I think 2 years before I actually retired, we decided to move. Get out of here, and so we bought a place up at Mount Kira and moved. The interesting thing about the Mount Kira move was I lived right behind where Gus Parrish used to live. And he was the general manager years way back. Actually the general manager when I first started work here. So that's the reason I moved out. It was just a poor fit with my values too, I suppose, and how I wanted to be seen.
So in terms of your role as general manager, that's a big statement to say, I'm the same as all of you. I want to be seen as integrated or, working with people in a way that doesn't appear pretentious, like you said, this residence could be seen. Looking at your time as general manager, am I correct in saying you were actually in that role around the time of the number 6 blast furnace?
Yes, yep.
Can you speak a little bit about the experience of being around for that project initially?
There's better people to talk to than me about that, because I arrived here about the time it was due to be lit.
Mm-hmm.
So...
action stations, basically.
Yeah, it was just a matter of throwing the match in, and we're ready to go. But there are a lot of people who actually lived with the building of that. Jerry Platt particularly. Jerry was the AGM of ironmaking, ironmaking I think, so he had a cinder plant, coke ovens and ironmaking. But yeah, my role was the Johnny come lately with that project. The guys had already done the work. So I think it was only a couple of months I was here and she was in production.
But I imagine there was some pressure to be coming in at this very crucial end stage.
Well, I witnessed some of that pressure, but Paul Jeans was still here then. And I sat in on a couple of meetings that the details would probably best remain private, but they were the most heated meetings I have ever been to. Yeah, mainly because the thing was way over budget and a lot of reputations on the line.
I suppose to wrap up your assessment or remembrance of that role as general manager, is there something of which you're particularly proud or that you look back upon fondly in that role, something that you would sum up as the key moment in your role as general manager?
Yeah, I think I was in that sort of role, if you like, since 1991. Small scale, diverse job too, the iron ore mines and the dolomite mine, and a defunct lime sands operation, and rail. We had a lot of rail fitting plants around the place. But what I can say is that the resurrection of the safety program, and there's probably some people here that would really want to challenge this, but I know I am dead right in this. The resurrection of the safety program started in Whyalla, and we had a steel meeting in Sydney, and over a number of months that we had these meetings, I kept saying to the general managers, and we had a mix of them then, the businessman types and the steel, that we are neglecting this at our peril. So we changed things around a while and we started to improve things. that came here and came right across steel. But when you think about it, it's gone much wider than just steel. The amount of talk about safety today is, wow, it's really good to see. When I went, I had a meeting in Melbourne with John Clark, who was a previous GM of Whyalla and a previous GM here. And he said to me, we had a lost time injury frequency rate in Whyalla of 80, which was horrific. John Clark told me there's no way known you can fix that. It's just the culture of Whyalla. You just got to change the culture. And we set about doing that in a very formalised way, by the way. And it plummeted. The lost time injury rate just nosedived. And when I left, we were down to a lost time injury frequency rate of 3, which was a long way from 80, but we still had a long way to go. But everybody, you guys have heard the phrase, that they became their brother's keeper. People started to look after each other, and we fixed a lot of things that were just downright dangerous. So that came here, and I think I extended that here as well, pushed that hard here as well, and started to culture change things where I didn't want people anymore to park their brains at the gate when they came to work and pick them up in the afternoon. They contributed. And the reality is, if you give people the opportunity to contribute, they will pay back in spades, and give them data. I can't imagine, I don't know anyone that can't resist the temptation to play with data. But if you think about it, there's a lot of people who've got jobs that has got no measure. They come in, they do their work, they go home, and they would have no idea by a measurement of have they done a good day's work, ordinary or an exceptional day's work. So we started in a small way. There still was a long way to go when I retired to extend the ability of people to get a measure on the sort of work they were doing. Can I give you an example from Whyalla that's, to me, is intriguing? It's not here, but it shows the power of this thinking.
Please.
We used to have, there was a saw shop in Whyalla, and these saws were 2.2 metres in diameter, and they were 32 millimetres thick. So they're damn big saws, and they were cutting structural steel as it came off the mill. You go down to the saw shop there, and there's the biggest blacksmith's anvil you've seen anywhere in the world. It's huge. And these people used to manhandle these blades. If you pick up a barbecue plate, they're heavy, but 32 millimetre thick, 2 metre high saw blade, but there'd be a team of them pick this thing up and put it on the anvil. And part of their job, apart from sharpening the saw, was to get it flat, and it's only waffles in it. So they had to get it flat. So they do that by putting the bend over the centre of the anvil and hitting it with the biggest sledgehammer you've ever seen. Their injury rate was just ginormous, way off the planet. I ran these plan improvement conferences. We taught people some basic tools on how to solve problems. And we made that widespread, and people took it on board. And I get a department to come up and host a project they're working on in the boardroom, and they would invite other departments to come and have a listen to what they'd done and how they'd done it. Laser pens were new. The guys from the BOS made a presentation with a laser pen. The guy from the saw shop said, I'll try and make this short. Can I have a laser pen? What for? I got an idea, he said, but if you can trust me, can you give me a laser pen? Got him a laser pen. A few months later, he called me down to come and have a look at what they'd done. Because the thing is, if you couldn't get that bang right smack bang on the centre of that anvil and you hit it, you might as well have been in the belfry of Big Ben. It made a hell of a racket. So now with the pen, I had the pen on the ceiling, smack bang over the centre of the anvil, and they never missed, because as soon as you just put the bend right on the red dot and then hit it. And their safety record started slowly to improve. 6 months later he came up and he said, "Can I get another laser pen?" And I said, "Why, you've buggered the first one." He said, "No, I've got another idea." I said, "No, man, what are you going to do?" And he said, this is a guy that not gone past high school, and he said to me, "Did you see the movie The Dam Busters?" I said, "Yes, he did." "Yes, I did." He said, "Well, we've got an idea, come back in a couple of months and I'll show you what we're going to do." So I went back a couple of months later, invited back, and they've got the surveyors in, and they've got a laser pen over there and one over there, and they've got them to meet directly above the centre of the anvil and exactly 32 millimetres above the centre. So now they can move that blade wherever they want to, and there was another job done that made this easy to get the blade up as well. They move it wherever they like. They can find every waffle on that blade and get it dead square. They reduce their operating cost by more than half. And when I left, they had minor injuries like you wouldn't want to believe. They had the worst lost time injury rate. It was more than 100. They hadn't had an accident in 2 years.
Well, what I love about that story, if I may interject, and this is a great message for anyone listening, particularly for people who are looking at working in the steel industry or any industry for which they don't have the right skills. If you listen to people, let people be inventive or pitching their own ideas. You said this guy was not even past high school.
No.
And he came up with a way that completely revolutionised their own safety and efficiency.
Yeah. Yep.
That's a great message.
And there's a lot of people, there are many stories like that, but they came from those sort of people and it just blew me away. Why the hell have we let all this go for all these years? No, I go back to where one of the things I said earlier, that the way the industrial relations were. Could you imagine anybody then, at the wages level, with a bright idea? No way. No, they'd let management rot.
Well, I think this is a great theme or idea to bring, the discussion to a point. I think a lot of people listening can take a lot of value or interesting points from what you've said.
Right. Hopefully.
I think so. I mean, there's compassion for people, there's egalitarianism, there's inventiveness, there's inclusion. And, I want to say thank you, George, for your time today. It's been wonderful to hear about your personal experiences and have you back here at Lindenfels in Port Kembla.
Thank you, Martin.
To everyone else listening, I want to say thank you for joining in and listening to George's story. If you'd like to learn more about any of the things that he mentioned in our discussion today, make sure to visit the links and show notes in your podcast app. And you can also visit any of our social accounts at BlueScope on Twitter, BlueScope on LinkedIn. Of course, there's bluescope.com as well. Thank you for listening to Voices of BlueScope, and we'll catch you next time. There was one more story, which was that rumour had it you visited the steelworks on a tour, but it was not as a normal guest would appear.
No, I went as Tony.
So you took advantage of that name?
I did. Yeah.
And how was that?
I loved it. Yeah, it was great. It was wonderful. And there was one bloke on tour, one of the guides, I think, had a bit of he thought there was something ticking in the back of his brain, but he couldn't connect, thank God. So I just went through like any other guest, which was just the way I wanted it. It was great.
So there is an advantage to that
there is
difference.
There is, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It could even be used, I suppose, out in public for a coffee order with someone who thinks
yes,
they
you
know
can.
you.
Yeah.
You can swap that around.
Sometimes I hear things about Tony, I said, well, that bloke, yeah.
You just got to remember which person you were at any given time.
I do, yeah.
It get difficult.
It does, yeah.